Welcome to Skip the Queue, a podcast for people working in or working with visitor attractions. I'm your host, Kelly Molson. Each episode, I speak with industry experts from the attractions world. In today's episode, I speak with Sophie Ballinger, Communication and Digital Content Manager at Eureka, the National Children's Museum. We'll be discussing the website tendering process and all the things you need to include to make a perfect website brief. If you like what you hear, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify and all the usual channels by searching Skip the Queue. Hey up, Duck!
Hey up, Duck!
Oh, I'm so excited. I've got the lovely Sophie Ballinger in here today from Eureka Museum.
My official title.
Eureka, the National Children's Museum. And we are going to talk all things how to write a website brief that agencies will thank you for. But first, it's the icebreaker questions time. All right. Weirdest thing you've ever won a prize for?
Oh, I got a really good one.
Ooh.
And it's kind of relevant as well. I got given a tiny little trophy for the best social media response. Tiny trophy, about that big. I've still got on my desk at work. And it was a visitor to Eureka, one very busy February half term, who compared it to the fall of Saigon in 1976. And I just replied, "You weren't there, man." That was quite weird, I think.
That is excellent. You are. I have to say, your social media feed is excellent.
Oh, bro, thank you.
You have good Twitter chat, which I like. What is your favourite smell and why?
See, I could be really corny and say my daughter's head. I love the smell of creosote.
What?
I love the smell of creosote. I think it's in association with my nan, who I loved to bits, absolutely adored my nan. And in order to go into her house, you had to go past the fence, which she creosoted religiously every couple of years. And I wonder if, I think that's the association, but I don't know. I love the smell of creosote.
Wow. Nanas and creosote it's quite an unusual combo, right? I thought you were going to say, Werther's Originals for my nana, creosote. To be fair, tarmac is the same for me because my dad was a tarmacker years ago. He used to tarmac kids' playgrounds. And so every time I smell the tarmac, it always reminds me of my dad because he used to come home thinking of it. Okay. What's your unpopular opinion?
See, I've really struggled with this. This is a relatively recent one that's just doing my head in. And it's why and how are Coldplay still a thing?
Oh, I've got someone that would 100% agree with you on this.
It's just doing my head in. I didn't even realize they were still a thing until relatively recently. So I've got an 8-year-old daughter who's discovered Radio 1, and I haven't really listened to Radio 1 for years. So I remember seeing Coldplay playing Glastonbury on the telly. I wasn't there. And I remember, we're probably talking late 90s, I guess 99, around then. I'm thinking, maybe they've got something interesting. And then I got really bored of them really quickly. And I wasn't aware that they were still a thing all this time. And then suddenly, every time I load up the BBC website, like the other day, there was a story about them going on tour, and they're doing an eco-friendly world tour where the floor people dancing on the floor charges. And now they've done a single with BTS, and
I know
they're just
they're current now. That's why they've done it, right?
I know, but why? They've got teenage children. Their kids must be mortified. They're the same age as me. It's like me doing a collaboration with Doja Cat or something.
This is my favourite unpopular opinion ever.
Yeah. Why? How?
Why
Explain
is Coldplay a thing? Also, Chris Martin does dance like a nana as well. If you ever watch.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, I mean, I look forward to the tweets about this. Tell me what you think.
Someone can explain it, and if someone can tell me who it is that's buying their records, hunt them down.
The wrath of Sophie. All right, great. Thank you for sharing that.
I feel lighter for it.
Right. So a few months ago, I was on a mutual friend's podcast. I was on Alex Holliman's podcast called Choosing an Agency podcast. And he asked me, what is the best brief that you've ever received, like website brief? I said it was the brief that we got from Eureka, the National Children's Museum, because it was excellent. And I went into great detail as to why. And I thought it would be really interesting to have a chat with you about the process of that tender process that you went through and why I think that your brief is excellent or was excellent. We actually wrote a blog which is up on our website. It's called How to Write a Website Brief That Agencies Will Thank You For, which is the same title as this podcast. And we detail in it all of the things that we would love to see as an agency from a brief. And it's things like, really understanding your company profile, the project goals and objectives, target audience, what's up with the current website, really what you want from your new website, competitors, schedule, budget, what that selection process and the feedback is going to look like. So there's quite a lot to it. Probably some more things that we could add to that now. But I thought, let's have a chat about the tender processing to start with, and then we can go through in detail why I feel like your brief is superb. That sound good?
Yep.
The way that we got involved in the Eureka brief is a little bit, it wasn't direct, so it was a bit of a weird one. So I think it was back in March 2016, you'd actually put out kind of an invitation to tender for the new Eureka website, and it was an open tender, wasn't it? It went out.
Yeah, we did an expression of interest, just a general. We just slung it. We didn't put it on any kind of special tendering sites. We just put an expression of interest out on all of our social media channels for anyone that wanted to get the tender once it was ready, and we got. It was, I think, 100 or 101 expressions of interest. And Rubber Cheese wasn't one of those agencies.
No, we were the 102nd one. We were 102 then.
Yeah.
Okay. So we found out about it through another agency. So a really good friend of mine, Eddie, who was at Hat-Trick Media at the time, I think he'd actually done a photo shoot with you years before.
Yeah, his partner and children were. Oh no, and him. I've got pictures of him with a laundry basket on his head. They were start of our Play 20 campaign and website. Randomly.
Well, I think he got the tender, or he'd seen it somehow, and then it wasn't for him, and he called us and was like, guys, this is a tender for you. I'm going to introduce you to Sophie. I really feel like you should go for this. And we saw it and went, yeah, defo. And that was how we got involved. So so we were like the 102nd person or agency that got in touch. Wow. How do you even manage that? Was that at that point, were you thinking maybe an open invitation was not the best of ideas?
Well, I mean, we had done just open tenders before. And I think kind of from the previous one, we had a really, really, really good response to, but we hadn't been anywhere near as open with that. So, I mean, that was the bit of learning that I took from doing the open tender previously, was that actually there were a lot of people that just weren't able to do it. The reason Eddie couldn't go for it was because one of the things I did specify in it was that I wanted this, the CMS, the content management system, to be open source. And the CMS that they work with wasn't. But they said, look, we can't go for this, but we know someone who'd be brilliant for it. And that was kind of when they put it through to you. But again, had we not specified that in the brief, they would have wasted their time submitting, kind of doing a submission for it, and they would never have got the gig, basically. So that was actually one of those things that was a learning curve from the previous time we'd done it.
Yeah. So 102 submissions of interest. What did that look like in terms? Because I know what we went through. So we got in touch with you. We got the brief late, so there was timeframes in it that you wanted a response for. We got this a lot later than everyone else. You very kindly actually gave us an extension so that we could come up and visit you, see the set, like really get a good feel for Eureka. And actually, you gifted us some time to talk to you as well. But what I really liked about the brief, and this is one of the things that I think is key about a brief, is you said, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to schedule time to speak to people. That is quite a rare thing sometimes with a brief, is that you don't sometimes, especially with very formal ones that go out on the formal tender platforms that I can rant about all day long. You don't often get the opportunity to actually meet somebody in person, or even grab a phone call to talk through the project and talk through the brief. But if you had 102 interests, how many people did you meet and speak to?
Well, the actual submissions, I think we got 38. I did meet a lot of them, not all of them. But for me, first of all, kind of when I've gone through tender processes previously, I've often had my hands pretty tied on them anyway. So I might have been working public sector or other institutions when you are told what you can and can't say, and they're really strict on it. And I'd kind of brought that approach across to Eureka, and my director at the time, that was how he viewed it. Whereas this time around, I just said, but why? For me, the relationship and my ability to get on with the people I'm going to be working with, and vice versa, they might spend some time with me and never want to see me ever again. But that is a key part of an effective working relationship with an agency. So I did say, and in fact, my boss then, who's my boss now, Michelle, was on here before, wasn't she? Yes. She was just go for it. And I said, it will take a lot of time, and I probably will have to spend a lot of time going and meeting people, explaining the museum, but I really want them to understand us. I want them to understand me. I want to see if we get on. I want to get some kind of feel for whether I think they get us. And a big part of that, actually, which you and Paul were brilliant at, was I want to see if they're going to come into the museum and interact with stuff and have a go and kind of throw themselves into it. I can't remember how many people I met with. I basically said, if you want to come, I'll give you some tickets, I'll give you some time. Everyone that took us up on that, I kind of blocked out an hour to spend with them. And it did take up a hell of a lot of time, But for me, it was absolutely invaluable. Absolutely invaluable. And you can kind of just get a sense about people's creativity, kind of just, whether they get us or not.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I would say from our perspective as an agency, it's a really generous thing to do. So because we want to see how the relationship is as well from our side, but also, there's something really important about visiting the place that you're pitching to do work for. I think that's a necessity. But I just having the generosity to give agencies that time is really, really important. You're asking them to commit an awful lot of time in pulling a proposal together. I mean, when we pulled this proposal together, it was not we'll just knock something out in like a day and it'll be done. There was a lot of time and effort that goes into it. So I think it's really kind of respectful to give the agency that initial time.
I was going to say it's the least we can do. We're expecting agencies to do, well, we're hoping that they're going to put a decent amount of time in and thought, and as you say, it's respectful, it's good manners.
So fast forward to the chosen agency, which was us. Thank you very much. We obviously enjoyed your company and didn't want to sack you off as a client, which was good. But another thing that was really good about the process is you communicated really clearly, you communicated really clearly up front what was going to happen, what the evaluation process was going to look like, how long it was going to take, how many agencies you were going to shortlist to, and then actually what you were going to ask of them of the next stage as well, because sometimes that's a bit loose, we're not sure. And I'll be honest, you did ask for creative for the next stage. So you shortlisted down, and the next stage was obviously meeting the agency with the team that were going to be making those decisions. This is always a really controversial thing in a brief, is to ask for creative. But you did it in a way that, again, I think was really respectful of the agency and their time, is that you actually offered to pay for the creative. And that for us, we very rarely do creatives as part of a tender process, because I think that if you haven't had that chance to speak to the client in that, our process, it's really collaborative. We're going to ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of research and stuff that goes into that before you come up with the creatives for it. It's very hard to kind of pitch something that you're never going to like what we pitch. It's going to be impossible. It'd be like a 1 in a million if we pitched something in this process that you went, oh yeah, that's it, we'll have that one. The fact that you'd offered to kind of pay for the time for people to do that, again, brilliant. That was like a massive tick for us.
And I'll be really honest about that. Again, the previous briefs that we'd done, which was, I guess, 4 or 5 years before, we asked for creative and we didn't pay for it. And we had a similar level of interest, and we got one agency that contacted us and said, no, we don't do creative. And that was it. This time around, actually, initially, we asked for creative and we weren't given a payment. And we got, within hours, people saying to us, oh, we're not so sure about that, we're not very happy with that. And of course, there were agencies that were fine and probably would have got ahead with it. But for me, I guess, partly because my background is I went to art school and did all that stuff, and it's like, actually I know how much goes into the creative process, and it just absolutely resonated with me straight away. And it was really interesting, the huge sea change in the space of a few years, from people just sucking it up and doing it to actually raising concerns. So I think it was literally within about 24 hours of us sending that information out, we backtracked on it. And we ring-fenced the budget. And actually we knew as well that budget wasn't enough realistically to cover the time that an agency would want to put into that creative work. It was all that we could afford. But apart from anything else, as you say, it just felt respectful. And I have been involved in tender processes before at other places, I'll say very clearly. There hasn't been a respectful attitude to that work, as far as even with the intellectual property of it. It's like, oh, we like that idea, and kind of, can we squeeze that into there? And it's never sat right with me. I've also been involved in tender processes where I'm aware that agencies are being seen and they're not going to get the gig again for whatever reason. We'll come on to budgets but I've been involved in ones where the budget that an agency has quoted is far beyond kind of the budget that we had available. So they were never going to get it. But bosses at the time were kind of curious to see what more they get for the money. And I'm sitting there looking at how much work they've done, and it just feels wrong. I'll be really honest, that it came back in a huge wave of people just going, I really want to go for this brief, but I'm not comfortable with that element of it. So we changed it, and I was relieved, and actually really it made me even more enthusiastic for the project that we were doing. And I liked the fact that straight away the people that we're working with weren't afraid to voice an potentially unpopular opinion. Yeah, it was fundamental for me. I'm really glad it happened, and I'm really glad to say that it's something that Eureka we have adopted subsequently for any tender that we do that has a creative element. So we did one recently for a digital marketing agency based in Liverpool, where we're opening a second site next year. And we asked for creative for that, and we made that payment as part of that as well.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, so we have adopted that as a policy now. I don't see it very often. I do see it every now and then. I'd love to see it more.
I would love to see it more. But I just think, like you say, it's just that level of it's respecting the time that goes into it. I think that was really a bit of a game changer for us. Okay, let's talk about the brief. Let's talk about why it was so good. So the first up thing, and we've talked about this, is that you let people talk to you. That was an absolute, that was the best thing about this. You let people talk to you, you let people come to visit, and you met with them. Massively time consuming on your part, but awesome for everybody involved, and really important from your perspective in terms of like how that relationship's going to be, what those people are like. It's really interesting that you said about interacting with the venue as well. I hadn't thought about that. That just was a natural thing that we did because it's awesome. But I hadn't thought about that you'd be looking for that necessarily.
It's I love taking people on tours of the place. I get quite a good read on them just from that. It's interesting.
Okay, so the second thing that really stood out for us about the brief was the tone of voice, the way that it was written. Let's face it, web briefs can be a little bit dry. You're talking about content management systems, you're talking about functionality and things that it needs, and payment processing and all that kind of stuff. However, you made this brief really fun, and you wrote it in Eureka's tone of voice, and it was excellent. I'm going to read out a bit here. I'll probably read it wrong, but in an ideal world, we'd love families to look at our website, let out an audible wow, and then think, I've got to go there, and potential funders to gasp and be inspired to support our work. There must be a way. For our part, we're absolutely, positively, definitely, completely unwavering in our determination to be a little less loquacious. I don't even know if I pronounced that right. Loquacious, sorry. I did not pronounce it right. Loquacious. We mean we won't be so wordy, promise. Just even that. Apart from the fact that I can't read properly. That sums up the tone of the brief, right? That was how it was just lovely to read. And we really got a feel for what it was going to be like. Just for everyone that's watching this, Sophie's cat's just appeared. Oh, hi, cat.
Go over there.
Yeah, we really got a feel for what it would potentially be like working with you and with the organisation, just from the tone of voice of that. Did you get any help with this? I think you did, didn't you? Was there a workshop that you went on?
Not with the tone of voice element of it, although I felt really inspired by it. I went to Alia Walker, who at the time she's with Smack Agency. She's with Milk and More now, I think. She had done a workshop at a Kids in Museums event that I went to, and it was about the briefing process, what the perfect brief would be. And it kind of fired me up. The timing was perfect because it was just before I started working on this brief. And she was just talking about, why can't you tell us what the budget is? Why can't you be open about this? Why can't you just, tell us what the challenges are? Tell us the things that you don't know and the things that you don't know that you don't know. And it's kind of just be really open. And you're more likely to find an agency that works, that's on your wavelength. And that kind of inspired me to, so I'd done quite a lot of work at Eureka generally since I joined it. I've been there 10 years last month.
Wowzers.
My Eureka birthday. And I've been there a few years at that point, and they hadn't had a digital person, and they hadn't really got a tone of voice. And for their external communications, they very much did in the museum. Very much did in the museum. You talk to the staff, they are chatty and confident and friendly and funny and human, and they'll admit if they don't know something, and then they'll go and find out for you. And they're really a bit geeky about they have little snippets of information, and everyone has their own talents, and we absolutely try and encourage those, because it's what makes a visit to Eureka memorable for me. And I couldn't quite understand why, you get into it and it's very human and conversation as soon as you walk through the doors. But externally, it wasn't particularly human and it wasn't particularly conversational. Obviously, initially with social media channels, that made absolute sense. But that started to filter through to the other content and the other copy. And actually, one of the big things that we knew about the website is we tied ourselves in knots trying to explain what a children's museum is.
Yeah.
And we're not a science and discovery centre. We're not a museum where everything's in cabinets, or there's historical collection or a collection of some nature. We're not a collections-based museum. It's an interactive space designed with kids, for kids. And on previous websites, we're tying ourselves in knots trying to explain that. And it's like, well, let's just show them. That was one of the challenges that went into the brief, was how can we show this? But a key part of that as well is that tone of voice filtering through. And again, it was a conscious decision to do it in that way, because for me, if you don't get it, you don't respond to that tone of voice, we don't particularly want to work with you anyway. We know that people will have looked at that brief, cringed, and never wanted to go back to it ever again. I can't think who, and obviously they're Philistines. But it was an important bit for us. And I will say, because I sat down with it and I just started writing the brief I'd always wanted to write, and expected it to go up to my director and up to senior leaders and then to go, what? But they loved it and encouraged it. And it was absolutely inspired. Kind of a fire was lit under me by Alia, and I did run it past her as well before we sent it out. I just said, look, you've inspired me to do this. Can you have a look at this and tell me what you think? And she had a look at it and was just
excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, big shout out to Alia and Lubna, actually, from Smack Agency. I know that agency very well, and they are superb. Okay, next thing. You defined the feeling of the brand really, really well. So the tone of voice, that kind of set our tone of voice, because we kind of knew how to communicate with you. So I can remember writing our brief and putting, us, we're quite chill, we're quite laid back about, just the way that we speak is quite, friendly, and it allowed us to be a bit friendlier in our response. So you would get us as well. So that was really great. But I think that the way that you define the feeling of the brand was really incredible. So we could kind of really understand what it was all about, without necessarily, sometimes it's difficult to describe what Eureka is, but describing that feeling of it, that really gave us a kind of sense of, yeah, we really want to work with this organization. This is for us. But the other thing was that there was a challenge in this brief.
Mm-hmm.
The website brief was the website needed redesigning. It wasn't performing particularly well. There were some things that were challenging. There were things that people were potentially not understanding about the museum. But you also had this kind of challenge that actually it wasn't necessarily a digital challenge. It was look, we've got this issue with people have to queue, and if they want their annual pass, they're going to have to queue again when they get here. So then they've got this double queuing situation. They're just basically just getting really pissed off. And what can we do about it? And that was great to have kind of an open-ended, well, here's the brief for the thing that we really need. But actually, we've got this problem as well. Like, what do you think you can do? And we were like, well, this is good, isn't it? Because there wasn't any kind of, it was really open. Like, what do you think that we could do about this? And this was like, oh, great. This is a real challenge for us to think about, So that was awesome.
I just try to find a way to write, help!
Help, but constructively. Help me. And then you actually carried out some internal testing as well, which was really useful.
That was, and fascinating. And I wish I had time to do it constantly. It was, we did, obviously, I kind of dived face first into Google Analytics and had a look at kind of where the traffic was and actually where we wanted it to be. So there's that element of it. But we also did some really intensive quantitative stuff with some user testing. And it was stuff I've done previously in the university sector, tends to be on a much bigger scale. But with this, we spent a day, we had 6 people who were our audience. We found some teachers, and we tried to identify people, all but one of them, who weren't aware of Eureka, hadn't visited us. And then we had someone that knew us really intimately as well. That sounds a bit rude. And spent a day. So we gave them a number of tasks. I sat with them. I was just mostly observing. It was kind of the agency we were working with at the time, Reading Room. They ran the actual process for us. And we just gave them a number of tasks and asked people to kind of vocalize what they were doing during, and where are you looking for, what search terms are you using. So this is a website, you want to find out about this, and watched people trying to do it. And within, I think the first 2 people, there were some huge things. So we had, for example, a really a low conversion rate on the book tickets page. I forget what the conversion rate was, but we knew it was low and we thought it was really weird. And really quickly, it's because that was the quickest way for people to find out how much it costs.
Right.
And it was, so they're not actually necessarily going to go and book that way, but they're struggling to find prices elsewhere. And that's what the vast majority of people wanted to know. It was, how much, where are you? And are you open now? When are you open? And that was the bulk of it. But we also knew we had a lot of other audiences. So one of the other ones that we did, so I sat with a teacher and went through, and the way we had the school information, there wasn't enough information for her. She needed really quite detailed, she needed downloadable things that she could print off for a class. She needed lengthy information about what the curriculum links were. So she's one of the rare web visitor who wants lots and lots and lots and lots of information, lots of wordy information. Whereas, of course, the vast majority of people, how much are you open? So it was, it was really, really, really useful. And it was time consuming, but because we kind of coming up with, planning what the scripts were and what do we want to do before, but absolutely worth it. Invaluable insights that we got from people.
Yeah, really helpful for us as well, because we do our own testing, but having that outside of you is always better than just our own internal kind of opinions about something. Going back to what you said at the beginning around Eddie and not being able to take the project on because he didn't work with an open source CMS, that was really important as well. The fact that you defined what you didn't define the platform. I know you were familiar with WordPress, so there was maybe a bias towards it, but you just defined what you needed from the CMS, and that was really great for us as well, because we could understand if we worked in a platform that was actually going to fit what you needed. And there was that was quite great. So there was a lot of specification around the things that you really needed to have as well. So you defined what you needed for the budget, and we'll talk about budget in a bit, but you defined exactly what you really needed, and then some things that you might like to have, but you were kind of realistic that some of those things that you might like to have might be outside of that budget as well, which was a really good. So there was a must have and then a like to have list. Sometimes you don't get that. So sometimes in a brief you get, this is everything that we want and this is the budget for it, and you have to go, whoa, okay, well look, like you might need to strip some of these things out and think about them as a phase 2. And that's another thing as well, is that when we talked to you, it was really clear that this, you could take a phased approach as well. And I think that comes out of being able to speak to somebody about, what's the real need here? What's the necessity? What do we need to launch with? And then what are things that maybe potentially come later? And how does that affect what you're doing? Yeah,
and I'm always really aware of fake deadlines and kind of we pluck a date out of thin air and we're going to work towards that. And with a project as big as this, with so many different elements, we were coming up to our 25th birthday, so we couldn't move that. There were elements of it that had to be ready for that. And then others that actually it's not the end of the world if we don't. If we can deliver them all for them, great. But yeah, again, it's that thing about being really clear, because you don't know, if people don't know the fixed parameters that you've got, then they're going to rule themselves out before they've even got any, the minute they've done a submission for it. And it's not fair asking someone to do all that work if they can't. It's like writing a good job description. You put the things in there that you absolutely need and the things that are absolutely necessary, and being vague just to see what's out there doesn't really benefit anyone. So I forgot what my point was now. It was really important for me. So we knew there are some things here that are deal breakers. So let's be really upfront about that. And then there are some other things that we, like the example you gave with some of the features, we didn't know how much they cost. We thought we'd quite like that, but can you do that within the brief? And actually, we're not going to discount you if you say, well, that's not something that you could afford within that brief, but for the sake of a bit more money. We were just really open about that and receptive to the answers that we got, and which were pretty consistent on that particular element, to be honest. I've seen a few briefs recently where it's really vague. And to me, that's just a waste of everyone's time, because the submissions that you read, again, I'll go back to a previous tender process. And I don't know how long I spent reading responses, and you'd be reading through like, this is really good. And then you get to an element and it's like, oh, well, they can't do it. And it's like, actually, it's wasted their time and it's wasted mine. Not anywhere near as much as mine individually, but it's if the more open you can be, the more efficient you can be for everyone's sake.
Absolutely. Let's talk about timeframes and budget, because again, with this brief, it was a really realistic timeframe, and I think that's important. Like we see a lot of briefs that come in, and you'll look at the timeframe, and then you'll think, okay, well, by the time we've submitted and they've reviewed and they've chosen, actually that leaves about 8 weeks for this project, and that's nowhere near enough. And then when you push back, they're like, no, that's the deadline. That's it. It's not moving. And I check sometimes. So I have a tendency to keep either briefs that we haven't won or briefs that we've decided we can't, for whatever reason, we're not a good fit for, we can't achieve that deadline. And we've had the discussion and they're like, no, it's not going to move. And then I check. So I set a little diary reminder to go, I'm going to go and check to see if that website went live then. And they never do. They never do. And I always think, well, look, you just, be realistic about it, right? If most agencies are coming back to you going, this isn't achievable, this is maybe, is there any wiggle room on this deadline? it's not an achievable time frame. So definitely have a little word with yourself about that. But also budget. There was a budget indicated in this brief. I cannot express how important it is to have a budget. And I think there's still that perception that it's because agencies are going to go to the top of it. And it's not about that. I really, genuinely, really is not about that. It is about what can we deliver for you that is going to work for your budget and for your time frame and all of the things that you need. And it will have an effect on the CMS, for example, that we use, or it might have an effect on what level of testing we can do, or how much time we can spend on wireframes, or how many meetings we have. It has an effect on every single part of that project. We might have just the most incredible idea, and we can pitch it to you, but then we've got to work out how we make that idea happen with the budget that you've got. If we know up front we can do all of that before we speak to you, rather than actually going, oh my God, you could have this amazing thing, and then finding out that your budget is 5k, and then we're going, oh, you can't have that now. Like, there's no way we can do that for you now. So it's so vital for us. But I kind of want to stress how much it isn't about us going, we're going to go to the top end of that.
Which I do get, and I hear that a lot, the fear that if we say we've got 15 grand, then everyone's going to say, well, we can do this 15 grand, whether it's going to cost them 2 or 30. Again, going back to a previous tender process I was involved in that didn't have a budget on it. So obviously everyone received the exact same brief. And I think on this particular instance, we got about 14 or 15 responses to it. And hand on heart, the bottom one was 4k. And the top one, I'm sure it went up to 160 or 180, responding to the same brief. And so of course they were just straight out, because we had nowhere near that much money. That was one of the processes where they interviewed someone that had quoted for higher than the budget that we had, just to see what the difference was, which just felt really unfair to me. But there's something fundamentally wrong with that brief if you've got such a difference in it. But that's always really stayed with me. So I do remember getting this kind of 8-page 4k submission versus this, I think it was 160, 180. And it just felt unfair and like a waste of their time.
It's crazy. Totally going to put my prices up now.
I did say, what kind of website are we getting?
Gold plated.
Or we figured maybe there was some kind of reenactment that actually people went to people's houses and started reading content for them. It was nuts.
Yeah. But then that just shows you why it's really important to put something in there, because and don't get me wrong, we will always push back if we don't feel that the budget is enough. We'd definitely push back. But we've also been like, yeah, this is a great budget. We could do everything that you need with this, and probably have some left over as well. So okay, clear feedback. Oh, this is another thing that happens loads, and I don't know how to solve it. So we have a bit of a whenever we get a brief, and it isn't as perfect as this one, there's always loads of questions that we ask regardless of what brief comes over. And one of the big questions is, if we don't win this, can we get feedback? And actually, if we do win, can we have feedback as well? Because even if you win it, there might still be stuff that you've not done as brilliantly as someone else that's proposed. It's just, you know, on the day you swung it or whatever, something made you win it. You got on well with that person. I don't know. So either way, you really, really need feedback. And partly because so much time goes into putting a tender, submission together. It would be really great to get some feedback, because if that's all we're going to get, at least we can then, there's something constructive that's come out of it. We can improve for the next one. We can understand, why we didn't win it, or what we could have done to win it, what we could have done better. Even when I ask, I would say 60% of the time, maybe 70% of the time, we don't get feedback. And
that often?
Yeah.
That really
it's really frustrating. And I really push as well. I don't let it go. I will send multiple emails. If there's a phone number, I will be ringing you. There's a few things. I think it is quite hard to give constructive feedback. And if you're not very good at it, you shy away from it. I think that people are uncomfortable about delivering bad news a lot of the time. But we're really thick-skinned, and we really need it. Like, we really need to understand what we did wrong. Or maybe it wasn't anything wrong, or maybe it was just someone just absolutely nailed it, and yeah, if in another circumstance we would have won it with what we delivered, but actually these guys blew it out of the water. But if we don't know, you just have this feeling of, oh, it's feel really sad. And it's actually quite, I'm kind of used to it now, and I am really thick-skinned, but it's a bit demoralizing for the team. They kind of need to know why we didn't win that, because we're all excited about it. The whole team is invested in a brief when it comes in, and we're all invested in really wanting to work with that company, or we wouldn't put the effort in to put in that tender submission together. So it has a really, sometimes a quite negative effect on the agency when they don't get the feedback. Not that they don't win. We all know we can't win everything, but it's about not understanding why. It's really hard,
I guess, as well. And for people that don't work in agencies and don't go through that process, it's trying to explain to them that you go for a job interview, you get called back for a second interview, and you do the task as part of that. You work on a big presentation, then you don't get the job and you never hear anything from them ever again. Of course you get invested in it. And if that keeps happening to you over and over again, of course it's going to start to knock your confidence, or start to, as you say, it can be really quite disheartening. Again, I'm a bit gobsmacked by it, because it's something that and it's not just me, I'm not going to say I'm kind of an angel on it, but the ethos at work and the people that I work with at Eureka, it's really important to us. And we do, so for example, with the tender process you were involved in, we did feedback, all of the people that were shortlisting, we did feedback in a spreadsheet on every single one, so that we could offer feedback. Realistically, we couldn't necessarily have a conversation with everyone that had submitted, but what we did say is, we will give you written feedback if you want it. Sometimes they don't. And for anyone that came to the actual doing creative stage, we would have a conversation with them. And I had a phone conversation, I think, with everyone that pitched. As you say, sometimes it's not necessarily going to be that constructive. In fact, to me, I'd say it was a closer thing, but this was one of those, not to blow smoke up your behind, but this is one of those when we just said, actually, this agency just blew everyone out of the water. And it was quite difficult, because one of the agencies that pitched for it was an agency that we'd been working with, so it wasn't an easy conversation, but I respect it enough to try and be honest about what was going on. It's fair, and as I say, I know that that's not just me. I think I've been influenced by the people I work with, and probably vice versa, but we know how important it is.
Yeah, very important, and really appreciated from our perspective as well. It
can be really painful.
One of the questions that we often ask, I don't always want to know, and I didn't in this circumstance, but sometimes it's nice to know what agencies we were up against. With this process, it's slightly different, because I think, we knew it was an open tender. I mean, we had no idea that you were going to get up to like 40 submissions. That was mad. But when you get shortlisted to go through to the next stage, it's often quite nice to know who you're up against. You were open to telling us, but I actually said I didn't want to know for this one.
Yeah, we asked all the agencies, because I think one or two of them had asked, and we asked the agencies if they were happy for other people to know they were involved, if they wanted to know. And I think, did you say you were happy for other people to know, but you didn't want to? I can't remember now.
Yeah, but I didn't want the pressure.
Yeah,
I think we really wanted to win it so much that I didn't want the pressure of Len looking at who we were up against and going, oh, they're much bigger than us, or they've got much more experience in that sector, or this, that, and that, and their work's awesome. And I just thought, don't know. Just go, just be yourself, go in and do your thing. Don't know about all those things.
Yeah, I'll have a look afterwards.
I did, yeah. Yeah, definitely did afterwards. But what I would say, what's happened so recently, we've had a few briefs have been sent to us, and it's lovely. So what's really nice is that we're chosen for people to send a brief to. So more and more so, we'll receive a brief and they'll say, look, we've chosen like 4 agencies that we've sent this out to. Some will say we've sent this out to 10 agencies, and I think that's too many personally. But it's nice that you've been chosen as one of those 4 agencies. And in those circumstances, I do always ask who the other agencies are. I don't always get told, but I do always ask, because I think it's for us, it's a way of gauging, do we think that we're actually in with a chance of winning this? And I think that's a really honest thing to say, is that we will not go for every brief that lands on our desk, because honestly, some of them we just don't think that we're going to win. And it might be because there's an existing relationship with an agency that's on that list that it's gone out to, and we don't understand why you would want to change from that. There might be potentially some research has been carried out by an agency, and the research has been included in that brief, and you're like, why would you get them to do the research if you must have a good relationship with them to do that? If you're not going to give them this, why don't you just go to them? Like, oh, is everyone just wasting their time? Are you going to, do you know what I mean? It's really honest, but sometimes that happens. And I think sometimes we go, okay, well, what work have we got scheduled in? And we have to be really realistic and say, we are really busy right now. What time can we dedicate to this pitch? Like what time can we dedicate to putting this tender document together? If we don't think that we've got enough time to give it justice, we'll also say we don't think that the timing's right for us to be able to do this. So I think sometimes knowing who you're up against is important. In this circumstance, I felt it was going to be a distraction rather than something useful. Okay, so your brief essentially covered all of the points that we go through with what is a great brief. So I talked about this at the start, and I will link to our blog post in the show notes for this episode. But essentially, we're looking for a really detailed company profile, and doing that in a way that it really showcases what it's going to be like to work for that brand. So that tone of voice is so hugely important in that essence. We need to know what the project goals and objectives are. And we really need to be able to ask you questions about that as well. So, if you're putting a brief together, think about how much time you've got to dedicate to this process, because being able to speak to the person that's wrote this brief and ask some questions, but an agency is absolutely vital. You are going to get a much better response if you allow that to happen. We need to know about your audience. If there's been any persona work done, that's always helpful. Where the current website has failings that we can't see, that we don't know about, what the new website needs to deliver, and really, be specific about, if there's a content management system that you are totally wedded to, we need to know about that up front, because it might not be one that we use. I put competitors on this list, but I think from a attractions perspective, I mean, obviously you've got competitors, but it's more about what space do you sit in, and what do you, what are you, and where do you sit into that kind of ecosystem? A schedule of, timelines, and that's not just for the project, that's for what the process of potentially winning this project might look like. Budget, big thumbs up for putting a budget in there. And then actually the feedback and selection process. I think some of the best briefs we've ever had, it's kind of specified what that's going to look like as well. And so we know if there's going to be an expectation of creative, and we're going to bring you and say, hey, we don't do that. Or, do you really need to see a creative at this point? Because I don't think it's going to work. And maybe we should look at, stuff that we've done previously. Will that work?
Can I make a quick point about creative, actually? I was thinking about this because different people respond to creative in different ways. And something that I thought was really interesting in this process, because I absolutely take the point of process as well, where it's like, well, you can not get a job because you've done something in green and they didn't like green. And it's like, I could have made it blue or purple or whatever. And you can lose it. There are people who could take creative too literally. And I think that's a real issue. And that's why, I can see why people don't like creative, the amount of work that goes into it aside. But it's that thing about people who don't, if you were doing the process from my side of it, from as the client, it's understanding that creative is changeable. And it's, as you say, it's not going to be the final thing. But also I mean, because what I would say with the creative that you and Rubber Cheese presented, actually the end website is very different from the creative that was in the pitch. And that kind of didn't matter. The thing that particularly me and Michelle Emerson, my director, look out for was the process that took you there, the walk that you went on to get there, and how you respond to us pointing out elements that wouldn't work for our brand. Because it'd be wonderful if you came in at your first attempt, it was absolutely nailed it. But we also understand that it's an iterative process. Anyway. And I think that is really important if you are asking for creative. It's understanding that you've given someone one bash at your brief. And I have worked with people who take that creative very literally and don't understand that it's just an example. For me, it's really useful to see someone's design ethic, so kind of their approach to it, the creative process, the feedback process, how open they are to it, it was the pitch that I was involved with yourself was, I think it was the longest one that we had. And there was a really long discussion between everyone that was involved in that pitch that was prompted by the creative. And that's really telling for me.
Yeah, I can remember it felt quite brutal. I'm not going to lie. We left that. I mean, I like pitching and it was great. I felt like it went well, but we left going, I don't know if they actually liked what we delivered, because they really went in on us on it. There was a lot of kind of like picking it apart. And I was thinking, but this was just supposed to be a creative. It was never going to be the final kind of shebang. So yeah, it was interesting to see the discussions that it sparked. And I guess that's part of the process as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. With don't ditch something because you didn't like green.
I mean, that's a life lesson, that, isn't it?
I like green very much.
Same. Can I ask? It might be that this is just the way the organisation does things, but based on would you do it again in the same way? So would you have an open tender? Because I guess you then had to spend time reading 38 submissions. That's a hell of a lot of time to then get them down to 5. So the time frames would have been, because if it's an open tender, you never know how many you're going to get, right? So you might have got 5, but actually you got nearly 40 and you've got to distill that down.
Yeah, could have had 102.
Wow.
Short answer, no. It's interesting because that process went so well, we adopted the same for a number of other briefs. So we did a number of open tenders on the next example that my team was directly involved in was a PR agency brief, and we would not do that again. That sounded really negative. It was still a really good experience, but it was too much, I think.
What would you do?
I think it's interesting. So obviously I haven't done another web tender since then because we still have a relationship with Cheese and we're very happy with it.
Why would you need to?
Why would we ever need to? It's really interesting. So when we have done briefs for other stuff, so creative design agencies for, obviously we're opening our second site, a Science and Discovery Centre, and we've been going through the process quite a lot there, and we have identified agencies and we've done quite a lot of our homework, and we've gone out to a number of them to invite them to pitch for it or tender for it initially. It's really weird because of course then you end up everyone knows each other. So with Mersey, we aren't based in Liverpool, so we don't know a lot of the agencies there. So we went to partners that we're working with on that development and asked them who they've worked with, who they'd recommend. And it's on the one hand you lose the wild card element of it, but then on the other hand it can be faster, hell of a lot faster, and a lot less time consuming. So it's really weird because I'm also aware of the fact that had we not done an open tender, then we wouldn't be working with Rubber Cheese now.
I know. It's a really tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. But it hasn't worked for us. I mean, it may be one of those that case by case, there might be other briefs that come up and actually we know that we should just go for it. So we did do an open one with, we worked with Playmaker Studios, who are based over in Liverpool, to develop our brand for Eureka Science and Discovery. And that was that an open one? Yeah, we did an open one for that. We promoted it on social, but we did also send it to people.
Okay, so you did a bit of a mix.
A bit of both. Nice. And that, again, that worked out really well for us. And we, who knows whether we would have ended up working with them if we'd done it differently. But yeah, it's a funny one. I really don't know. What's your take on it from the agency perspective?
It's really difficult. So, and actually, in the podcast that I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, the Alex Holliman's Choosing an Agency podcast, I did state in that podcast that I'd like it when the organisation has done their own homework and they ask you, so they know who that tender's going out to. And because honestly, I just think it saves a lot of time for everyone. I just can't imagine how long it would have taken to read through 38 submissions.
Long time.
Because I remember how long our submission was as well. So from a time perspective, and I think less agencies the better. And again, it's from a selfish perspective. When you're one of 10 agencies that it's gone out to, does it really need to go to 10? Like, do you really need 10 submissions? I think 4, 5 max is about right. So, but then on the other hand, like you say, in this circumstance, if Eddie hadn't have sent this brief to us, we would never have been working with you. So there is something to be said for having it a little bit open. I kind of like that mixed approach that you took. I still think I'd sway towards doing the research and sending it to
I think generally that's what we do for the most part now, but I wouldn't be closed to the idea, depending on the brief and depending what the project is as well. I mean, in all honesty, with the PR one, we benefited greatly in that you can imagine kind of PR and reputation management agencies. We got so many things sent to us. Kind of every day we were walking into the office and there was a new kind of mystery box with a crown in, or one had a knitted beard in it. I mean, it was just like really random stuff. And so it was kind of fun, but there's so much time and so much effort that was being put into it, and money. And so, when we've been looking beyond that, we haven't repeated that because it didn't feel fair and it took a hell of a lot of time. And actually, out of the web agencies that wanted me, I met with a lot of them. PR agencies, just so many of them wanted to come. And it wasn't me that had to spend time with it. It was my colleague, Ruth Saxton. But it was so time consuming for her. It was insane. And so swings and roundabouts. I don't know. There probably are briefs that I would say go for it. And if you don't know really what you want, again, it's that being honest. If you're very specific about where you want to be with it, and you have a vision in your head and you want it to be very comparable to this competitor or that competitor, but maybe you do try and look for source agencies or find examples that do that for you. But actually, when it's a brief of that nature, when it's like, look, these are the problems we've got, we don't really know what we want, otherwise we could just go find someone and get them to do it for us. We want creativity, we want innovation, we want help, support, we want a relationship, we want this. So we didn't know where to turn for it. So I think it was right for that one.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking through this with us today. 2 last questions for you. First question, actually 3 questions. What happened to the fake knitted beard? And I hope that you kept it. Second question on that. Is that better than the fake fringe that I once sent you? I think
nothing. Not. Do you know, I'm in the process of moving and that fringe has appeared again recently. But even better than that, I think my mum was babysitting and she found it was just, what is this?
A fake fringe. Everyone needs one.
Obviously.
To explain, listeners, I wasn't sure whether to have a fringe cut at one point. So I bought a fake fringe that I could wear to see. I didn't wear it out. I just wore it around the office to see if I looked okay with a fringe. There's nothing weird about that at all.
And it doesn't look like a merkin at all to the untrained eye.
I'm so glad that you said that, not me. Okay, final question.
My mother.
Wow. On that note,
what was the question?
Final question for you. No, final question. A book that you would like to recommend to us.
Oh, The Beard, circling back, came home with me, and I may or may not have put it on my baby daughter several times and taken photographs. Book, I'm even prepared with this. I've got it here. This is, I was going to be really geeky and do like a workbook. It's really good for people that work in content, and I decided not to do that. I love books, but I'll be really honest, particularly since I've had a child, I've struggled. If you go downstairs, I've got a bit of a show-offy book collection. There's lots of Russian literature and kind of when I had a brain that could process all this stuff. I can't do it anymore. Anyway, this guy is a chap called Craig Clevenger, and this was his first novel, The Contortionist's Handbook.
Oh.
And the reason you can see your reflection in it, mate. The reason I suggest I've done this one is I reread it a couple of times. I don't tend to reread books very often. I love them, but I very rarely reread them. This one I inhaled. It was that easy. It's a story about a chap with very bendy legs. No, it's a story about a chap who fakes his own identity, and he kind of goes in cycles and he rebuilds his identity each time. And it's him trying to get out of a very difficult situation. So it's a kind of a thriller. But I just loved it. And I kind of loved the fact it felt like, when you discover a new author, it was recommended to me from member of staffing. I think it was Waterstones in Derby. And I just bought it on the off chance, and it was a debut novel. He's written a couple of others since. He works in a library in Texas. And I might have spoken to him, and he might have sent me a copy of his second book. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to do a bit of a pay it forward as well. I've also got, this is the paperback copy that I bought at the time. So if anyone wants it, if they tweet me, first person to tweet me, I'll post a copy of it out to them.
Oh, well, I was going to give it away as a prize. Totally ruined my prize giving, but whatever.
Sorry. But this is the copy that I got given in Waterstones in Derby. Oh, I've obviously lent it to someone else as well, because I've got a little, says enjoy, yes.
Oh, we'll leave that in there. Okay, so I tell you what, let's do it properly. If you want to win Sophie's book, if you head over to our Twitter account and you retweet this episode announcement with the comment, I want Sophie's book, you can win it, and I will make sure that she sends it out to you.
I will do, with the enjoy.
Thank you for coming on. It's been a delight to chat to you. I am going to see if I can get the word loquacious into a conversation today. Hey, I said it right. Woo! Yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing with us, Sophie.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Skip the Queue. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find us. And remember to follow us on Twitter for your chance to win the books that have been mentioned. Skip the Queue is brought to you by Rubber Cheese, a digital agency that builds remarkable systems and websites for attractions that helps them increase their visitor numbers. You can find show notes and transcriptions from this episode and more over on our website, rubbercheese.com/podcast.